I guess we go.
Yes, we go.
Yeah.
3,
Hi,
2,
everybody.
1. Hello.
Welcome
Good
to our
morning.
talk. Good morning.
So, without any further ado, first, thank you, guys and girls from Doors Club, for organizing this awesome conference again. And also for inviting this dynamic duo again. I think it's our 4th year in a row now.
Something like that, yeah?
So next year will be a memorable experience. It will be 5 years, and we have to come up with something more idiotic than looking like an Easter egg hunter.
Yeah.
So
we've visited your city. We love it here.
We love Zagreb.
And it's really nice to see you guys are in the Easter mood already. Just a really quick introduction. I'm a pilot, but I also do quite a lot of consultancy. I work with the open source community a lot. I really enjoy it. I think it's important. I think for open source is really a driver of innovation, and you guys are part of that.
I am a professional Easter egg hunter myself as well. And besides that, I run a company in the Netherlands called Open Innovations, and it's, well, the word open kind of says it all. We do stuff with open source software, and Robin and I have been involved in business and friendship for over a decade by now.
Yeah.
So we will definitely have a beer on that later on, but we will probably have a beer anyway.
Exactly. Before...
And you should too, because having beers is important.
So before we get into the presentation, just very quickly, this is not a technical presentation, but it is an important presentation. And since we started on the presentation, we've suddenly seen there's a huge media interest in it and a lot more information coming out. And that's partially thanks to Miss Elizabeth Warren, who's running for President of the United States of America.
Who actually seems to be thinking about stuff.
Exactly, that's sort of surprising in America, but you know, good development. That basically means that in this presentation, there's a lot of pretty pictures which we will go through pretty quickly. We hope to offer you the full presentation when we find a place to upload it.
Yeah, it's very text heavy, so we've emphasized points which we think are the takeaways from the message. And we will be short on time. Because everyone will be short on time if you only have 30 minutes, and there is a reason why I'm not on Twitter. I am incompatible with a short format. So bear with us.
Yeah, let's start up with what is wrong with monopolies. Well, you've seen the points. Predatory pricing can be applied. Basically, it's when you undercut your competitors. You basically sell things for a loss, and you do that deliberately to kill competitors. And you can do that globally. So over a global market, like Amazon, for example, does, but you can also do it locally. And locally means per geographic segment, but it also means you can target a very specific company. You say, you're the only one building this product. I want this product, so I'm just going to build the same product. I'm going to undercut your prices massively, which, you know, people have done quite a lot. Then you have this thing called vertical integration, which is where basically you start with Amazon again. You've got the marketplace, and then you've got products you put on the market, and then you go through the whole supply chain. So, for example, how do I send the products to the customers? But also, how do I get in touch with the customers? What customer care do I have? We have aggression, which is basically where people bully you into selling out for far less than you're worth.
Or simply copying your product and see what I care.
Yeah, exactly. And it kills innovation because a small pool of large companies can just sit down and let their products sell at whatever pace they want to. They don't really have to build up. And there's little incentive for startups like guys like you to build new products, because you kind of go, you know, I'm not gonna survive with these big monopolists, or you know, I just want to sell out quickly. So it makes half-baked products.
And if you look at some statistics, you will see that the current Big Five, or the Frightful Five, as they're sometimes called, they now spend an exponential amount more on search and acquisition than that they do on their own research and development, which is, well, basically a dead end, because how many startups can you come up with also as a person, thinking up ideas, deploying them on other people's infrastructure, and then selling out to those same companies, that's not necessarily circular or sustainable business.
So what's happened before? So there's two huge examples, Marvell, AT&T, and Standard Oil. Those are the guys that have been broken up. And what you can see about these is Marvell and Standard Oil, in the Netherlands, there were different phone companies. I'm sure in Croatia there were phone companies. Standard Oil also had competition from guys like Shell, for example. But they were still considered monopolies. So we're not talking about one global company that has everything. And you see that with the big five, there's overlap. So they compete to a certain extent, but they do so on such a large scale and with such reach, with using the tools we just had a look at.
That no one can get between there. But the problem also if you take a look at the historical examples of companies being broken up on antitrust basis, you basically see that after a while, and especially the next slide covers it neatly because that's the AT&T. If you look at the beginning, you have one company, and if you look in the end, you still have basically one company because now AT&T and Time Warner are actually merging again. So, hey, welcome back.
It leaves Verizon. It's quite shocking, though, to see that where people have tried to break up companies that basically they've said, we're still going to go back. And why is this? It's because there's been a change in the way that people think about monopolies.
And it's also a problem because of the network effect that you see on a technological level. You have to integrate into a level or a network that has enough leverage to be able to make yourself seen on there. I mean, Signal is an awesome tool, but if your mother or grandmother doesn't use it, then what use is it? Oh, and by the way, Signal runs on AWS anyway, so.
So why is it important for all of us? Well, this is a lady who ran a really interesting experiment on Gizmodo. She said, I'm going to cut out the large companies one by one, and then I'm going to cut them all out. So I'm not going to show all of them, but some highlights here. This woman started with Microsoft, and it turns out she had to block 21.5 million IP addresses, which is pretty big, you know. Then she said, well, there's a lot of services I can't use anymore because they're owned by Microsoft, like LinkedIn, Skype, GitHub, which is, for us, it's a bit of a problem if we want to get rid of them. She also couldn't use her car's entertainment system because it was running on Microsoft things. And really, if she wanted to get technical, she couldn't go shopping.
Point of sale systems, ATM, it's all Windows XP embedded. Note the XP in there.
Yeah. Well, then she went to Google, and it turns out that she can't use Lyft, Uber, Yelp, anything which uses a map.
Basically, your life is over.
Because Google Maps is used for everything. Now, the one thing which really got me...
I have a very professional pointer.
No, basically, for Internet of Things devices, they say if Google is up, then the Internet is up.
Yeah.
So there's a single point of failure which basically determines this is the Internet in real life. So if Google goes down for some reason, all your Internet of Things suddenly have a real problem, and a lot of sub-products do as well.
And we've seen that recently in the Netherlands, literally, where a lot of community watches, they use WhatsApp for their communication among themselves. And recently, Facebook went down a couple of times, and that literally led to emergency calls from the people doing the neighborhood watch saying, I cannot protect my neighborhood anymore. I mean, there is always a question how efficient neighborhood watch is, but all right, fair enough.
Well, and then she went on...
It is critical infrastructure, and then the point being, the internet, as it should have been a distributed setup, that's what it's basically built to do, to circumvent single point of failure. We've effectively brought that back to 5 monopolies.
Yeah, and then if you try to cut them out, then you find out you're living in the 90s.
Your life is
where
over.
Loading times of websites are like minutes because they can't get the ad trackers. Well, then she tried to get rid of all of them, and she had to use one of those little Nokia phones with a texting, which couldn't load all her contacts, and texting was horrible. She couldn't drive around properly.
Who doesn't love a T9?
A lot of stuff, turns out, it runs on Amazon Web Services. And if you try to use paid alternatives, so she tried to use Proton Mail and RiseUp and some other file sending things, it becomes impossible to send large files. She's an interviewer, so she couldn't.
But also, if you want to go on holiday, forget about it. There's not a single travel agency locally available that does not in some way, shape or form use any of the big five services.
Yeah,
so if you take the
Signal, the privacy thing.
I mean, it's all end-to-end encrypted, so it's not necessarily that bad on Signal, but the thing is that the internet has become a very singular shape, and this was a woman already very aware of her social media presence. You will note the very little amount of Facebook clicks. I can tell you this is not representative for most normal smartphone users, but I mean, without Amazon and Google, the internet is broken. Or maybe it's already, but still. So people start to wake up, and we have some news stories about that.
Yeah, that keeps coming, but basically they're upset. You know, more and more scandals are coming out, and it's not just Cambridge Analytica at Facebook, it's not just the EU slamming on Google. It's basically people making huge amounts of money, muscling out competition, but also not paying their taxes because they're using global tax infrastructures.
Yeah, and that's indicative to not being supportive in a normal society. I mean, I am a company owner in the Netherlands, so I have to provide for my own pension. So my pension is being invested in normal stuff like grocery shops and supermarkets and stuff that you would say like people will want to use for now and in the future. So recently, my pension lost about 10% of its value. Why was that? Amazon bought a grocery store. Thank you, Amazon. Now my pension is less 10%. Yay! Maybe I should invest in Amazon. Oh wait.
Well, maybe you should. Although their public relations are not doing too well because people are waking up and starting to publish about this. They're saying, yeah, no, it's really killing competition. Even though they're not maybe a monopoly yet, they're starting to work that way. And this is, you know, you see the merchant and platform thing, that's the vertical integration. The killing every category it touches, that's basically the predatory pricing. And if you want to know about how bad Amazon is doing, this is the article you should be reading.
And it's a long article. It has a lot of information in it, and I will warn you that Robin has copy-pasted almost the entire article in the next couple of slides. So
fortunately, not all of it, but here comes the text-heavy part. Basically, what she's saying in this article is that there's been a change in the way that people look at monopoly law. Basically, now they're saying the only thing to judge monopolies by is by the pricing to the consumer, which basically means if a company like Amazon, who drops their prices to undercut other companies, they're still okay in an antitrust sort of way.
But how is that? Because like Uber is making billions of loss each year, and they're now going into the stock market. Why would I want to invest in a company that is losing billions? Well, maybe it's because it will be the only company left in this field in the future.
So then they can raise the prices, which they have done historically. It used to be that that antitrust used to look at the structure of a company. And they said, well, you know, if there's lots of small companies and choice, that's better for competition. Now, because they're only looking at price, they're not looking at things like price fixing and collusion. They're not looking at how hard they're making it for new people to come into the market.
But they're also not looking if the ecosystem as a whole can even survive due to this type of vertical integration. This is a common thing also in let's say, supermarkets where small farmers, or one of my favorite examples, winemakers in France, I'm an amateur winemaker, so this hurts, winemakers in France are being bought by Chinese wealthy people to basically ship out their entire harvest to China, or their wine to China, and basically what happens then is next year the Chinese investment will have found another darling. The farmer will end up with his entire harvest because his entire market is already gone to the next competitor. That's a shame.
Yeah, and also because we're just looking at price, we're not looking at things like quality, which is also a bit of a problem. Well, there's basically two things here that's quite important. One is the system of leverage, which basically says I can force you out of a market, and then we have foreclosure, which is where I use my multiple lines of vertical integration to basically give myself better quality items, cheaper pricing through those goods. So for example, here there's the bakery they've got. They say, well, the flour I'm giving to my competitors is more expensive and it's worse quality, so obviously people are going to want to buy my bread.
But it's also interesting if you control the whole chain of events, because if you look at Amazon, traditionally it's a distribution platform for other parties involved. But how do you make money from a distribution platform? It's basically by cutting margins somewhere in your supply chain. And being a very big entity in a singular domain means that you can literally extort partners in your own supply chain into, well, basically losing profit. But those parties themselves still have to make money. So they will offload, that was a very valid point, they will offload the loss they make on Amazon to the other customers. So now suddenly the other individual little shop owners and little distributors will have to fill that gap.
And this example is specifically DHL and UPS. Basically, they had to raise their prices at the same time giving Amazon huge discounts. And then Amazon, because they started selling their capacity, they said, yeah, then I'm going to set up my own shipping company, which they did. That's called FBA.
And they also took their own web marketing platform to see what products were interesting and which products were selling well. And then suddenly they set up their own manufacturing line of those products called Amazon Basic. So now you have the little cute Duracell bunny in America almost selling no batteries at all anymore because Amazon now has its Amazon Basics brand. That's awesome.
Yeah, and they can basically show their own brand products higher up in search results, which means people do buy it.
So we've now been bugging you for about 20 minutes on why this is bad. Now we will try to explain why this is actually relevant for you, because I have been bitching about my pension going away, which is an important thing for me, but there's other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Now what we're seeing is that they are buying up startups. This is very much about artificial intelligence and the underlying infrastructure of the internet. They will own the actual pipes that feed the data. They will be able to see what's on it, and because of quality of service and net neutrality rules, they can make sure that their websites load fast, and you as a competitor, well, I don't know, maybe, trickle.
Especially AI and machine learning, it's all about cycles, it's all about power, it's all about I/O, and who controls the capacity on the web currently? What can you do without something like AWS?
Yeah. And you're looking at basically venture capitalists. So I think that's a great quote. They say they're now talking about a kill zone around the giants. Basically, they go to see what the giants are doing at the big conferences, and they see what products they have stolen. And then they say, yeah, well, we're going to copy that. So you know that like whoever's got that product, we stop investing in there.
And I see this literally in the Netherlands. I'm doing a lot of consultancy for healthcare device manufacturers. And as soon as Google and Apple unleashed their plans to the world about their own healthcare platforms, investors basically...
Crickets.
Yes.
Well, here we have a look at the amount of acquisitions last year. So 29 companies for 3.72 billion for Google. Amazon, 821 million. Well, it's not really surprising that they're the guys doing it.
And it's gaining momentum. If you see over the timeline, which you cannot actually read because of the resolution of the monitor, left is over
2017 and that's 2019. You can see it's speeding up. And if you look at the amount of acquisitions they've had, it is the big companies, the big tech companies doing huge amounts of acquisitions. Yeah. And if you look at the money spent, that's bizarre. Cisco up top is doing 583 billion. No, sorry, it's doing 83 billion. Mm-hmm. Still a silly number in terms of them. And then we look at is it possible for you guys as open source community people to make patents and generate revenue on that? wow.
Well, basically, we have to acknowledge that the current state of, let's say, financial sustainability is also revolving around the fact that you have some level of control over your own intellectual property. And broken as it may be, the patent system is more or less the only thing that we currently have in place on a global scale, or at least in the US and Europe. That is more or less of an indication for that. But if you see how much of that market has already been swamped, how the hell are you getting?
Yeah, even the new big guys like Netflix and Lyft, they can hardly get their foot in the door.
And if you notice that all those unicorns, none of them is making any profit at all. They're all losing money.
Yeah. So then we have Spotify. They're a very concrete example of someone who's going against the Apple market, where they're being monopolized. They're saying, no, we can't make enough money on that market if we also have to pay the market fees. And we're also seeing in the open source world, very specifically, that large commercial open source vendors, they're leaving open source as open source because they feel that's the only way they can compete.
Yeah, or they have adopted open core models in the past, like the MongoDB parent company, and they're basically now being put out of business by Amazon deciding, okay, I have like 100 developers left, go and fix me some extensions, I will do my own hosted version of MongoDB. So basically, there goes your business. And
yeah.
I mean, it's very debatable whether open core is a valid business model, because personally I don't think so, but still.
Yeah, well,
oh, yeah,
so this is, now we get into the world of the pretty pictures. This is the information they have on you and on you as a developer.
So name, gender, birthday, but also healthcare related data.
Fitness data, your contacts and your friends, etc. Well, we all know that that's a problem. But if you put that in this perspective, and you see that basically not only are you giving them your knowledge, you're also doing it on their platform. Yeah, it becomes a bit scary for you specifically.
And we have to speed up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. So where else are we seeing these monopolies? It seems that they're growing they're popping up, mushrooming, you know. We've got basically a lens manufacturer for spectacles, so anyone who's wearing spectacles, your prices have been driven up by these guys. The right to repair, basically, a company says, it makes it very hard for a company like Fixit to repair things. So what they do is they say, well, we can repair it for you on our terms. It's kind of monopolistic.
And even the Oscars have decided that Netflix doesn't really make movies because their movies don't end up in the cinemas.
Yeah, the Epic Game Store is really upsetting some people because they want to use Valve and Steam. But yeah, the Epic guys are undercutting things. And then Boeing, well, you know about what happens when the 737 MAX goes down. So,
yeah, and then the thing about the 737 MAX is very interesting, because that is a case where you see that a compliance organization or a regulatory body, the FAA, has basically offloaded its entire responsibility to the manufacturer himself. And that is basically the butcher examining its own meat, where, yeah, that doesn't help at all. So are they escapable, the modern platforms? Well, this image, which is highly unreadable, says that you can't. This other image shows another interesting thing, because here we have brand value, and if you look at the cluster of tech, you might say, all right, that is a pretty containable aspect, but do you think that Mercedes-Benz can run without any of the tech firms? Do you think that AT&T can run without them?
Any of the finance, anyone in the finance sector? So they're in a position to push the people around, and they're big enough to do it. And if you ever look at very specifically Amazon again, you see the orange line, that's retail. They're the largest food retailers in the world. They've got a lot of other stuff, but there's also a big gray line where we can't actually see how they're making money.
So they're reporting to make profit, but they're not exactly reporting how they're making that profit. And that's interesting.
And then if you compare those figures to what's in here, and fortunately Europe combined is between China and the US, yeah, you see, they're responsible for a very small set of companies responsible for a huge amount of business in these countries. And here you can see global GDP in 2018 was 884,000 billion. Yeah, they're a significant percentage of that.
Yeah, and people are starting to notice, and especially Elizabeth Warren has found that indeed the approach of the vertical integration of services is problematic, because that means you own the entire chain of events, you control all the parties in your ecosystem, and basically you can push everyone else out.
Yeah, and the old mentor of Zuckerberg, he wants to go further. He wants to place limits and break them up. He wants to prevent acquisitions and go even further.
And the European Commission has done whatever it's currently able to do in a legislative point of view to stop this. But the problem with the fines that are currently being laid on the tech companies is they couldn't care less. This is just a minor percentage of their average annual profit. So
it's the third fine. So they did 5.1 billion last year about Android to Google. Then they did 2.7 billion for manipulating search results.
And basically it's just in their books for next year. We expect to be fined this much.
Yeah, Google's just going, it's a couple of billion here and there.
And if the Trump administration has learned the word consumer data privacy and wants to do something about it, then something really should be wrong.
There is something up then.
So it won't be easy. But we want to do something about it, because we don't want to spend half an hour just ranting. Oh no, yes we do,
well,
but still.
Fun, but
we also want to engage into, let's say, some meaningful context in how can we as a society, especially a European society, make our way around these giants, because yes, we can. In Europe, we have DG Connect, which is responsible for the digital single market, which is actively involved in even funding CPU development based on the open risk specification to be able to circumvent the Intel monopoly. We have ENISA coming up with the security guidances. I'm going to shamelessly promote my talk for tomorrow afternoon, which will be about the new EU Cybersecurity Act. We have ETSI. ETSI is the European Telecom Standardization Institute, because, well, open standards do help competition. And we've also been to Horizon 2020 funding schemes, and the amount of SMEs being funded through the Horizon 2020 program is immense. And the nice thing about the Horizon 2020 program is that it's basically funded from the fines that are being laid on Google. So in another aspect, you're like employed by them, but still. So, last slide.
Yeah, exactly. Well, almost last slide. There's basically, but there needs to be more emphasis. You need to talk to people in the EU, and they need to talk to you need to get them to talk to your politicians, and you need to talk about structuralism, so the vertical integration problem, and the fact that because there is some minor competition, these guys can collude, they can work together, and they are pressing out small businesses. It's not working for us.
So, and as yours truly happens to be in a number of work groups there, and Robin is also affiliated to them, we want to help you. If you're interested, we could do a bird of a feather session later on. And please ask us anything about how we can point you to the right work group. I hope maybe there's interest, maybe not, but this is us reaching out.
Yeah.
So, that is...
Ta-da!
Hey, happy.
Hopefully you enjoyed this.
We're on time.
We're awesome. On time. Wow, we have 1 minute for one question. No. Yeah? We can have, one question.
Who has the $1 million question?
No.
Who dares?
Yeah.
Question. Wait.
Thank you. So the Europe and US, okay, fine. We can, if we push our politicians, we can do something about it. But what about China? Because they have the monopoly on their side, and they are a huge market, and they can crush, if anything, that we separate, like Amazon, Facebook, and such.
Answer is yes, you are right.
Well, no, there's also the mentor of Mark Zuckerberg. Basically, he's also saying we want to have restrictions on acquisitions. So that means that Tencent can't come in and buy Facebook because it's anti-US antitrust law.
And you see the same thing.
He wants it to be.
You see the same thing happening in Europe now as, for instance, vital infrastructures in countries are being actively protected against takeovers. And also there's now...
Specifically, there's Huawei in the Netherlands.
Yeah, Huawei,
because of all the spying, they're saying, well, maybe we're going to ban you from using 5G equipment.
So, and my talk tomorrow about the Cybersecurity Act is actually about how, from a procurement point of view, the European Commission wants to stimulate quality and security, and thereby eliminating a part of the, let's say, cowboys from the market. So that was a very good question, thank you.
Yeah.
I got to promote myself for tomorrow again, that's always good. So,
well,
yeah.
I hope you enjoyed this.
And if you're interested, drop some note at the registration desk who doesn't know that we've come up with this plan. But
now they do.
We will inform them later. And if you want to have a sit down with us later on, then, well, we're happy to do so.
Thank you for listening.
Cool.